India in the past, although was a much smaller economy, but in the past, India seemed to have showed much more, much more courage and much more spunk, much more capacity to stand up to big powers. And in the context of Trump's America today, is India beginning to, the question he raises in the column is India beginning to lose that capacity?
The recent address to the Davos World Economic Forum by the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has suddenly kind of woken many of us up, certainly woken me up, to the fact that, this is the kind of speech that an Indian Prime Minister would have made in the past. I mean, whether it was an Indira Gandhi or Atal Bihari Vajpayee, I mean, the kind of Prime Ministers who had the courage to speak up, that's the kind of speech we would have made, It's not just that the Prime Minister is not speaking up. It's not just that the political leadership is not speaking up, which of course they should. But it's also that there is an attitude of the media, which represents the elite, and of a lot of business leaders, a lot of people who are on the stock market, who say, let's not upset the Americans, let's not do anything that will cost us in terms of our share of world exports or exports to the United States, or would have an impact on the stock market. And what surprises me is the reaction of this commentariat, the geopolitical, geostrategic, geoeconomic commentariat, who write copious of columns all over the media. I don't see an anger. I don't see a major criticism of this decision. Every time India is at war with Pakistan, we are running for supplies to other countries. And that is what has made us vulnerable to dependence on Israel, which made us vulnerable in dealing with the Gaza problem, and pushed us into a corner in some ways. But we should reduce these vulnerabilities, not create new vulnerabilities. Today, there's a perception that India is not that tough and probably vulnerable, which is why I think Donald Trump is still pushing. He's trying to see how far he can push.
Hello, and welcome to this special discussion on The Wire. Today, we will have a conversation with Dr. Sanjay Baru. And Sanjay Baru needs no introduction. He is an author, journalist, columnist, former media advisor to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, is a keen watcher and writer on geopolitics and geoeconomics. So today, we are going to discuss a recent column by Sanjay Baru on a very provocative column, I would say, on why India is losing its stomach to preserve its strategic autonomy. Now, it's a column that he wrote in the Indian Express, where he argued that India in the past, although was a much smaller economy, but in the past, India seemed to have showed much more courage and much more spunk, much more capacity to stand up to big powers. And in the context of Trump's America today, is India beginning to, the question he raises in the column is India beginning to lose that capacity to stand up to America and preserve its autonomy. So welcome to our show, Sanjay. We are, since we are discussing your column, let me right away ask you as to what exactly were you trying to imply, and what exactly did you mean when you said that India actually probably India today doesn't have the same capacity to stand up to big powers as it did earlier. Sanjay, yeah.
Well, thank you, Venu, for having me on your discussion. You see, first of all, the context of my column, or that particular comment in my column is in the last paragraph. is a general feeling that is there in the country among the kind of what you call commentariat, that ever since President Donald Trump started rubbishing India and mocking the Indian Prime Minister and making all kinds of claims and criticism, the Indian response has been subdued.
Yeah.
And initially, this was explained that, look, we don't want to get provoked. We are trying to arrive at some kind of an understanding that there would be a India-US free trade agreement or a trade deal, and therefore the Indian approach to the Trumpian kind of provocations has been to be calm and cool and subdued and restrained. For a long time, I think many of us went along with this. We understood, okay, it's not a bad strategy. But I think the recent address to the Davos World Economic Forum by the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has suddenly kind of woken many of us up, certainly woken me up, to the fact that, this is the kind of speech that an Indian Prime Minister would have made in the past. I mean, whether it was an Indira Gandhi or Atal Bihari Vajpayee, I mean, the kind of prime ministers who had the courage to speak up, that's the kind of speech we would have made, which is that we don't accept big power bullying. We don't accept big power hegemonism. In fact, we rejected it even in the 50s when we are a much smaller country, a weaker economy, a weaker kind of polity, and a new post-colonial state. Someone like Jawaharlal Nehru was able to stand up and speak for a very independent India with a very independent voice. So I think there is a sudden realization that we have been probably more subdued and excessively cautious than is required by the occasion. And if a neighbor like Canada can speak in the language that Mr. Carney spoke, certainly India should be able to speak. But we haven't heard the Prime Minister articulate any such strong view in response to the kind of embarrassment, insults that not just President Trump, but many members of his cabinet have subject our leadership to.
Yeah. So Sanjay, the title of your article in the Indian Express also says an India that can needed in the Trump era. What is needed in the Trump era is an India that can stand up for itself and can pay the price. Now, it seems to me that what you're also suggesting is that a much richer India, relatively richer India than, say, 2 decades ago or 3 decades ago, is unwilling to stand up and probably losing its capacity to pay a price to preserve its strategic autonomy. Now, where is this coming from? Are you also suggesting that the political elites, the ruling political elite, and generally the elites in India have become, too transactional or too pragmatic, as you will, and are unwilling to pay a price? I mean, what exactly can you elaborate this unwillingness to pay a price? What price? Yeah.
You see, this is a larger issue I draw attention to, though I must confess I have not kind of discussed it in any great detail in my column, but I think it's certainly worth another column, which is that it's not just that the Prime Minister is not speaking up. It's not just that the political leadership is not speaking up, which of course they should, but it's also that there is an attitude of the media, which represents the elite, and of a lot of business leaders, a lot of people who are on the stock market, who say, let's not upset the Americans, let's not do anything that will cost us in terms of our share of world exports or exports to the United States, or would have an impact on the stock market, etc. But what they're not verbally saying is, let's not do anything that might harm my children's interests in the United States, right?
Yeah.
And that draws attention to a structural change that has happened particularly over the last couple of decades, which is the growing connect between the Indian elite, the Indian power elite. As you know, I wrote a book called India's Power Elite. And
Yeah.
more recently, I wrote this book, Secession of the Successful,
Successful. Yeah.
on the kind of secession of the elite, of those who are, the privileged beneficiaries of India's 70 years of independence and growth, of their increasing dependence on the United States, of their
Yeah.
increasing willingness to accept subordination by the United States. We
True.
don't question, for example, very little questioning by the Indian elite and Indian media of what United States was doing in West Asia, the bombing of Gaza, for example,
Yeah.
or the fact that the US says, don't buy oil from Russia, don't buy oil from Venezuela, don't buy oil from Iran. And I mean, there's very little questioning here saying, who the hell are you to tell us where or we should buy our oil from or where we should not buy our oil from? That kind of questioning, it comes from some elements in the political class, particularly from the left parties. But surprisingly, it doesn't come even from a so-called nationalist political party like the BJP. Many people in the kind of BJP and the Sangh Parivar have been rather subdued in their reaction to all these tough measures. So I think the signaling we are giving to the world is that the Indian elite does not have the stomach to pick up a fight with the big powers. I mean, forget the United States, even vis-a-vis China, our response, there's a lot of rhetoric in our response to China. But at the end of the day, you look at the number of Chinese goods being imported. Who is importing them? It's Indian businessmen. In fact, a lot of them from Gujarat, a lot of them Gujarati businessmen who are importing goods and selling them in the Indian market. So, there is a rhetoric of nationalism. But when it comes to actually taking difficult decisions, which might pinch one's pockets, as it were, there is an unwillingness to take those things. And that stands in contrast to the kind of patriotism we saw in the post-independence years. I mean, for example, you take the sanctions against our nuclear program. We withstood those sanctions and yet developed a nuclear program. So here was a country that was subject to sanctions, but learned how to deal with it. Today we are scared of sanctions. And the minute there is this, you want to kind of be the good boy. And I think that is a change in elite attitudes.
Yeah. So Sanjay, you rightly said that we are we at times we give in too easily. For instance, I'll just give one example, and I want you to talk about it. When recently Trump very arbitrarily and unilaterally announced that he's going to put additional tariffs on all the countries who are trading with Iran. Now, India, even before a formal notification perhaps came on that, we had news here that India was already talking about winding down its operational role in the Chabahar port, which is of immense strategic importance for India. In fact, some time ago, Prime Minister himself had given an interview to 3 or 4 very well-known Hindi channel editors who are known to be very sympathetic to the government, and had said that India's investment and participation in the Chabahar port was of great value, great strategic value. And we all know the Chabahar port is a kind of a parallel route being built for India to Afghanistan, Central Asia without crossing Pakistan. And it's a parallel to the Gwadar port, which is part of the China-Pakistan project, the BRI project. Now, taking this specific example, how do you think India could have responded? Do you think India gave in too early, reacted too early even before getting the details of the whole thing, the official notification, as it were, from America? What's your sense here?
Well, I'm completely baffled by not just the government's reaction, but by the reaction of the so-called strategic community. Because for the last 20 years, I've been hearing about the strategic importance of Chabahar, which you mentioned yourself. I mean, everybody was writing columns. The Chabahar is important, and not just because it gave you a route into Afghanistan, which of course is true, but of course, and that was highlighted by many Indian military experts, etc., that it allowed you to approach Afghanistan through the western side, but also that it is part of the north-south corridor that
Yeah.
links up to Russia through Central Asia to Europe.
Europe.
Now, so Chabahar port was kind of portrayed as a great, port of great strategic importance, both for geopolitical and geoeconomic reasons, both for trade and for security purposes. That this was a major investment we were making. And when the Biden administration, said they would sanction India on Chabahar, I think we tried to talk to them and gave the argument that it's important for geopolitical reasons and got them to back off. But now we are buckled. And what surprises me is the reaction of this commentariat, the geopolitical, geostrategic, geoeconomic commentariat, who write copious of columns all over the media. I don't see an anger. I don't see a major criticism of this decision. It's also possible that a lot of these people are now bought into what was promoted as IMEC, the India Middle East Economic Corridor, that actually bypasses Chabahar, right? I mean, that takes Indian trade through the Gulf region to Israel and the Mediterranean Sea. So there is an American stake in getting you off Chabahar because they want this route through Israel into Europe. And we should have, of course, options. We should have a Chabahar route. We should have a IMEC route. We should have other routes. It's in India's interest to have multiple routes to the rest of the world. But why did we get off the bus as far as Chabahar is concerned? And more importantly, I mean, that is a secondary importance. I think for me, the bigger question is, how is it that all these guys who keep writing these columns about the strategic value of Chabahar over the last 2 decades have suddenly gone silent? This is what I say. The Indian elite have become weak-kneed. They talk of strategic autonomy, but they don't actually take decisions that enhance strategic autonomy. There is a gap between the cup and the lip as far as strategic autonomy is concerned.
Also, Sanjay, coming back to the question of the Indian elites, you very well know, you've also written about this, how the Indian diaspora in the US, the big successful Indians, big businessmen, or entrepreneurs in the US, and generally the NRIs who have done well in the US, it was assumed all along in the last 10 years, especially during Modi's tenure, that they are part of India's big, if you like, in India's big lobby to deal with the US administration, to act as a bridge between India and the US. But it seems in the last 1 year, after Trump started behaving the way he is, started insulting India and started penalizing India on an almost regular basis in the last 7, 8, 9 months, this debate also came up whether what is the diaspora doing. So Shashi Tharoor wrote an article, if you recall, in the Indian Express only, that the diaspora is perhaps not playing its due role in acting as a bridge between Modi and Trump. So many prominent diaspora members wrote back saying that they cannot, because they're living in the US. Many of them are citizens or OCIs. And they particularly they argued that they cannot substitute for diplomacy. India's diplomatic efforts cannot be substituted by them. They can at best act as they at best supplement India's efforts. So how do you view this change in the attitude of the Indian elites in the US who are connected to the Indian elites here? So I want you to analyze this.
Well, again, let me do a minor commercial again for my book, Secession of the Successful, because I discuss this issue in that book, right?
Yeah.
I question the hypothesis of the entire Indian diplomatic establishment that the diaspora is an aspect of Indian soft power. And in fact, I asked the question, if I were living, let's say if I were an Englishman living in England, and I see a lot of Indians around me, what would my reaction be? Would I say, oh my God, India is so great that all these Indians are able to come here and work? Or would I say, oh God, India must be doing so badly that all these guys have run away and are coming and working here? In other words, how would the rest of the world view the so-called diaspora? I mean, I'm not talking of people of Indian origin who left many centuries or many decades ago, but those who've been living in the last quarter century or so, all the great Indian Americans running corporations, universities, research laboratories all over the US with so much influence. I mean, CEOs of major powerful multinationals. And we say that's Indian soft power. What does it mean when you say it's Indian soft power? Does it mean that they are symbols of the success of the Indian educational system? If so, is the Indian educational system attracting people from all over the world? That everybody wants to come and study in India because they want to become like all these Indians who are doing so well in America. It's not. So that soft power doesn't work. Then what is the other aspect of Indian soft power? Is it that these Indians have acquired a clout in their respective countries, whether it's the US or Canada or Australia or New Zealand or wherever, Dubai or Singapore, that they can actually make those governments pursue policies favorable to India? No, there's no evidence of that. So when the test came in front of us, when the time to test this came in front of us,
the real test, right.
The real test was when Donald Trump started, virtually demeaning India and making fun of Indian leadership and dealing with India in a most objectionable manner. And what did the diaspora do? They just shut up. They said, oh, we are American citizens. We got to take care of our family, our job, our interests. So you're diplomats, that's your job. So I asked, how come our diplomats have spent such a lot of time and money entertaining all these representatives of the great diaspora, hoping that when the day comes, they would stand up for India? All those crowds in the rallies that Prime Minister Modi addresses, Wembley Stadium, Houston, here, there, everywhere. Bharat Mata ki jai, Bharat Mata ki jai. But when Bharat Mata is being insulted, stunning silence. All the characters who have appeared on Indian television, virtually with tears in their eyes and ecstatic about the Prime Minister's visit to their respective country. And we've seen this all on Indian media, right?
Yeah.
Oh, India is third largest economy. We feel very proud to be in the United States as Indians, etc. Okay, the US is treating me badly. What are you doing about it? Stunning silence. Understandable. I mean, there is entirely understandable from an individual point of view, right? No individual would like to risk his and his family's kind of well-being. But then let us not have this notion, at least on our part, that there's some kind of Indian soft power, that they're a weapon that we can use in the pursuit of our national interest. I'm sorry. That's not what they're doing there. They're taking good care of themselves. They have left India to live a better life, not to be able to sacrifice that life in India's defense.
Yeah. Your book, Sanjay, also mentions, talks about how a much larger number of Indians are migrating to other countries looking for jobs in the last 10 years. It's really, the numbers have really gone up. At one level, millionaires migrating has gone up. At another level, recently, an article by Ruchir Sharma, an investor, also pointed out in Financial Times that ordinary workers, they about 600,000 plus ordinary workers are leaving India to work, to seek work abroad every year. And this number used to be half of this some years ago, maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, and it has doubled. Now, do you see this as one of the reasons why the Indian elites, or even generally the Indian workers or aspirational Indians seeking employment, they do not kind of show enough capacity, or do not have the stomach to to stand up for India's autonomy, because they are looking at the world as a big opportunity to work, and they're not particularly patriotic about or nationalistic in that sense, in the sense of economic kind of well-being, seeking economic well-being. Could that be a factor?
Well, let me put it this way. Of course, it could be a factor. I don't deny that. But I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, what kind of views, positions is the Indian elite living in India taking about what is happening in the world, right?
Yeah.
What is the view that the upper middle class, the business class in this country taking about what's happening in the world?
Yeah.
How many of them would feel comfortable for an Indian leader to speak like Mark Carney, talking about the power of the powerless? This was the language of the national movement. Yeah. This was the language of Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, and even indeed of Indira Gandhi, and I would say go on to the say of someone like Atal Bihari Vajpayee, that for a long time Indian leadership stood up for some principles. Mm-hmm. I have seen on social media, chaps who are into the stock market, making money in the stock market, reacting to my column, saying that the era of Indian politicians making grand speeches is over. We need to worry about our bottom line, and we need to worry about the market. We need to worry about our exports. So this is what is happening at home. Yeah. You today have an elite, a business elite, an intellectual elite, a middle class, upper middle class elite that is so sold out on the lifestyles of the West, aspiring to be part of that Western world. And consuming the products that come out of the West, that we are not willing to stand up and recall our, the anti-colonial heritage, the nationalism of the past, and not the great past. I mean, even the recent past. Let me take you back to the period around 98 when India tested nuclear in Prime Minister Vajpayee's time, and the United States imposed sanctions on India. I recall at that time, I was in the media, I was an editor at that time, and I was speaking at a CII event on the impact of sanctions on India. At a time when many again in the media were worried, oh my God, these sanctions are going to kill the Indian economy. But I had scientists and engineers from various organizations coming and telling me that, we are happy the sanctions have been imposed, because the kind of things we are trying to produce here, we're being imported by our customers, and we wouldn't have been able to develop these technologies if we had open access to imports. I mean, I had chaps from government, public sector organizations telling me this. So even in response to the 98 nuclear sanctions, there was a certain element of patriotism. What the hell, America
or confidence, patriotism and confidence.
Patriotism built on confidence. That let America impose sanctions, we can do it on our own. Today, that is lacking, at least by and large. I mean, I won't say 100%. I mean, there are still many people who are willing to pay the price for their nationalism. But even within a very overtly kind of nationalistic political formation, which is today the ruling dispensation, you find people wanting to compromise. And hoping that tomorrow somehow Donald Trump will be a different man and will once again come and hug Prime Minister Modi, and it will all be very nice and we'll all live happily ever after.
It's interesting, Sanjay, you're saying this, because some time ago I read a statement by Bill Gates where he said precisely this. He said that US, by imposing virtual sanctions on China in regard to semiconductor chips, high-end technology, they actually incentivize China to fast forward their artificial intelligence and their semiconductor chip development industry. And pretty much the same thing has been said by NVIDIA chief, the biggest chip company in the US, Huang Jensen, has also said that by completely withdrawing from China, or not really putting export controls on China, all that US ended up doing was make China, develop its autonomy, as you said, by domestic, tech progress that they made. So is it? Are you suggesting that what should India do today? Now, let's come back to some solutions that you may suggest. If India were to actually be willing to make some sacrifices in terms of strategic autonomy, reviving or restoring its autonomy, what should India do? Should it sort of engage much more with China, or in this year India is the chairman for BRICS summit? Should India act more proactively within BRICS? I think last week there was some news that RBI has proposed a digital currency among BRICS countries to facilitate the payment system and transactions within BRICS countries. Now there are opportunities. What should India do? What do you suggest?
Well, three things. First and foremost, you mentioned BRICS, and yes, indeed, we should take BRICS more seriously than we have been taking and work with BRICS countries. Certainly, Brazil, I was very happy to see Prime Minister Modi spoke to President Lula recently. And, I'm delighted to see a much greater kind of interaction between Brazil and India. I'm also happy to see improved relationship with China and that we are maintaining a balance with Russia. So BRICS is an important platform for India. We are the founding members of BRICS. And therefore, I think and this year we're going to be chairing the BRICS summit. So sincere commitment, a positive agenda that enables us to work with these countries in promoting our national interest. That's number one. Second, we said we are the voice of the global South at the time of the G20 summit. When the G20 met, Prime Minister Modi convened the Voice of the Global South summit. And I think we should be seen far more sincere in that commitment and articulate it. That's the point I was making about Mark Carney's speech. Mark Carney, in many ways, whether he was sincere or not is not the issue. Many people said, oh, he's a hypocrite. The Canadians are hypocrites. They don't mean what they said. They will go and compromise. I don't care. Let them do what they like in their national interest. Yeah. But I'm talking of the essence of his speech, which is giving a certain direction to the rest of the world to think about the power of the powerless, as you put it. That's the kind of approach India should take. And we would inspire support from the global South, the voice of the global South. I think the third thing we have to think about, Mark Carney in his speech said that there are three vulnerabilities for Canada or for most countries: food, fuel, and defense. Right? Now, food was a great vulnerability for India. People forget. In the 60s, we led what was called a ship-to-mouth existence, which is what gave America a lot of power because they were exporting grains to India and we were dependent on imported food.
That doesn't exist.
That doesn't exist. After the Green Revolution, thanks to Indira Gandhi and C. Subramaniam and M.S. Swaminathan, India has become self-sufficient in food. So food is not one area of any great concern for us, but fuel and defense are. And in both areas, I think in fuel, Prime Minister Modi's initiative, the Solar Alliance, something we should take seriously. I think the Chinese have done much more in renewables than we have been able to do still now. But we need to pursue that whole strategy of promoting renewables and reducing dependence on oil. But also ensure that we have access to the oil that is available. Buy oil from Iran, for heaven's sake. Buy oil from Russia. Buy oil from whoever is willing to sell to us, and not allow Americans to decide whom we'll buy our oil from. Third, defense. And their Atmanirbharta and defense is fundamental. Every time India is at war with Pakistan, we are running for supplies to other countries. And that is what has made us vulnerable to dependence on Israel, which made us vulnerable in dealing with the Gaza problem, and pushed us into a corner in some ways. But we should reduce these vulnerabilities, not create new vulnerabilities. I agree we should buy less from Russia. We should buy less from everybody else and produce more ourselves. I think that this is an important manufacturing industrial strategy. that we create a capable, competitive defense manufacturing industry at home.
Yeah. Also, finally, Sanjay, since you kept referring to Mark Carney's speech, another point that he made, which seems very relevant today, is that he urged that all the middle powers should come together and challenge America's unilateralism. Now, would you say that today middle powers in the global south also are much richer than they were, say, three decades ago? They're much more capable in the context of all the three things you said: food, fuel, and defense. So it's easier for the middle powers to come together today than it was for the poor global south countries 30, 40 years ago to come together against the big power. Is that a valid argument?
Of course, it's a valid argument. And if you don't mind my saying this, I don't like to constantly show off, but I actually wrote a column saying exactly this somewhere around 2016-17 during the first Trump administration. When Donald Trump was president during his first term, when there was this trade war between China and United States.
Yeah.
During that period, I was affiliated to the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. And I wrote a paper and I published a column saying precisely this, that we have to look at other options and not just be stuck with either the Americans or worry about the Chinese. But there are other countries which are equally worried about the United States and China. And I said this, what am I talking of? 8 years back.
Mm-hmm.
And today it's all in the open. The Europeans are as worried about the United States, which they were not till Trump came along. It's true, they were not as worried till last year. But I think to many of us it was clear that Europe would be increasingly worried about an assertive United States and assertive China. And that gives you the option that many other countries in the world, you take a country like Indonesia, close to China, but building bridges with America, doesn't want either the Chinese or the Americans to breathe down that neck. Malaysia is not the country. Vietnam would be another. India is there. Brazil is there. France, Germany. So there are a large number of countries that would not want to be vulnerable to pressure, either from the United States or from China. And those are the middle powers. And I think that agenda was in front of our eyes for a long time. And in some ways, I think Jaishankar has had that in his mind, even if we didn't pursue that aggressively. Now that we are faced with the insults of Donald Trump, I think we are a little more open about pursuing that policy.
Finally, Sanjay, I want your assessment of how much damage has already been done to India in the past, say, 8-9 months, in which we haven't had a trade deal. We've come close to doing a deal 5-6 times, but for some reason it did not fructify. Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, American Commerce, he had his version, but which also seemed to say that we missed an opportunity last July. And we have a budget coming up. The rupee is under pressure. There is foreign investment, negative outflow over the last 3 months. There are several vulnerabilities that our economy is facing. So how do you see the short to medium term? Are we going to continue to be under pressure? Because unless these trade deals fructify, foreign investors will hold back. They don't like uncertainty. They will come in only after they find that there is some stability in regard to overall macro fundamentals, which includes the exchange rate, etc. How do you see the next 6 months panning out?
Well, the next 6 months, if we need to really go ahead, we have to overcome 3 vulnerabilities which have stared us in the face, particularly in the last 2-3 years. I mean, they've been there for some time, but I think in the last 2-3 years, they are staring in our face. The first vulnerability is actually because of domestic politics. India's reputation as a secular, plural, democratic country whose rise and empowerment is in global interest. Manmohan Singh used to talk about India's rise being a global public good.
Yeah.
That is, are people still seeing India's rise as a global public good? Or are they simply seeing this as the emergence of another kind of, difficult country to deal with, like China? A highly communalized India, aggressive with its neighbors. Is this an image that we have externally? Or are we still seen as a global public good, that our rise as a global public good because it's a secular, plural, democratic country? I think this is an important question which stares us in the face. This is a domestic vulnerability. The second vulnerability is the inadequate pace of economic growth. Whatever the government may claim, the fact is that private investment is not happening. Now, you asked a question about foreign investment. No foreign investment will come unless domestic investment starts rising. In the last several years, the capital formation in the private corporate sector has been stagnant. And for a variety of reasons, Indian private sector is not investing. Demand is not rising. Capacity utilization is very low. So, all these are economic domestic vulnerabilities. But then they contribute to a third vulnerability, which is really the vulnerability that we have been talking about, which is that of perception of India.
Yeah.
India was perceived, despite these vulnerabilities. We had all these domestic problems in the past, but despite these problems, we had a leadership that was capable of winning international appreciation and support as a kind of voice of global South, of a post-colonial nation, not afraid of the white man, not afraid of Western imperialism, having fought and won against Western imperialism. That was India's image. That, you can't take India for granted. After all, 1971, the Chinese and the Americans ganged up with the Pakistanis. We didn't get scared with that. We withstood that kind of pressure. Today, there's a perception that, India is not that tough and probably vulnerable, which is why I think Donald Trump is still pushing. He's trying to see how far he can push. So he hopes that someday we'll kneel down and say, sir, please, stop hurting us more. I think the message we have to give to Mr. Trump, maybe we are in a subtle way, but maybe my expectations are higher. I want a clearer message. Do what you like. We've got options. I think that is the message we need to put out very clearly.
Thank you very much, Sanjay, for talking to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Venu.